See, push in. All right, can you all see my screen? Just put a thumbs up maybe. Yes, perfect. Okay, so maybe as we're getting started, you can drop in the chat, where are you from and what are you excited to learn tonight? The chat. All right. Can you all see the chat? Okay. Great. Yeah, so maybe if you want to type in just kind of where you're from. I'm in San Diego, and I'm just excited to do this event. It's just something I've been thinking about for a long time, and so I'm really excited that you all, Fit Foodie Chicks, is here and in this collaboration. Arizona. Okay, Nicole from Arizona, how to deal with stress better. Krista from La Jolla. Hi, Krista. So I learned stress management techniques. Angelique, San Diego, coping with burnout. Andrea. Hi, Andrea. Control your nervous system and how to manage stress better. All right. San Diego, Jen, Cindy, Michigan. How to stay focused on multiple goals without stress. And Minnesota, okay. Lisa's from Minnesota. I like to learn and listen. Awesome. So a lot of different things going on and a lot of different interests. I'm really excited. So before we begin, before I teach you anything tonight, I want to acknowledge something. Most of you are the strong ones. You meal prep, you show up to the workouts, you take care of your families, you're the reliable friend, the capable one, the one who has it handled. And I have a feeling not many people ask how your nervous system is doing. So before we talk science, before we talk cortisol or perimenopause or recovery, let's just arrive. So wherever you're at, if you're seated or standing, let's put your feet flat on the floor and just allow your body to be supported. If you're sitting on a chair, just feeling the support of the chair. If you'd like, you can put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. And begin by taking a slow inhale through your nose and a longer exhale through your mouth. Again, take a deep breath in through your nose and a deep exhale, letting go, like the letter H sound. And one more at your own pace. Now, if you're here tonight, something inside you is tired of pushing. Not because you're weak, not because you've been strong for a very long time, but maybe your body isn't asking for more discipline. It's asking to feel safe. And that's what tonight is about. So my name is Dr. Mini Ratu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, executive coach, and faculty with Stanford Psychiatry's Yoga X program, where we study the science of stress regulation and embodied resilience. But my work didn't begin in a lab or a lecture hall. It began in my own body. Long before I had the language of neuroscience, cortisol, or the nervous system, I knew what it felt like to be high functioning and completely overwhelmed underneath. I grew up in a Punjabi family. Punjab is a state in North India where strength wasn't optional. Women held everything together. We pushed through, we didn't complain, we performed. And like many high achieving women, especially those of us who care about fitness and health and performance and doing things right, I became very good at functioning, very good at being the strong one. But in my 20s, after experiencing trauma in an abusive arranged marriage, my nervous system collapsed. On the outside, I still looked capable, educated, driven. And on the inside, PTSD and severe depression had taken over. And that experience forced me to confront something most women are never taught. You can be disciplined, you can be intelligent, you can lift heavy, eat clean, achieve professionally, and still be deeply dysregulated. But no one had ever explained that to me, right? They never explained that strength and regulation are not the same thing. So my healing became a study. I immersed myself in yoga, breath work, strength training, somatic therapies, then trauma science and neuroscience. I wanted to understand why my body felt unsafe, even though my life looked successful. And eventually that path led me to clinical psychology and to teaching within Stanford's Yoga X program, where we bridge modern neuroscience with embodied practices. But what matters most for tonight is not my CV, it's this. Like, I understand the woman who meal preps, who lifts heavy, who tracks her macros and supports everyone else and still lies awake at 2 a.m. wired and tired. I understand the woman who looks strong and is strong, but whose nervous system is carrying too much. And I've dedicated my career to helping women like you build what I call adaptive capacity, a strong body, a steady nervous system, and the ability to perform at a high level without burning out. Because real strength isn't constant output. It's regulation, it's recovery, it's resilience under pressure. It's knowing you don't have to carry everything alone. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So I'm curious, I want to make this real. I want you to drop a number in the chat if you'd like, and tell me where you're at tonight. If it's a 1, you know, I look strong on the outside, but I feel exhausted underneath. I'm doing, and 2, I'm doing everything right with fitness and nutrition, but my energy still isn't stable. 3, I can't fully relax even when I technically have time to. Or 4, maybe you relate to all of this. So I'm just curious where you all are at. Let's see the chat here. Sorry, it overlaps every time I open the chat here. I'm not that tech savvy. A lot of 3s, okay. Andrea's at a 2, okay. Yeah, okay. Hard to relax for a lot of you, huh? Like you might have the time and the vacations, but it's still hard to relax. Yeah, and then Jen, looking strong on the outside, underneath not, feeling exhausted. Awesome. So look at that, you know, this is not individual failure. It's a pattern. And tonight we're going to unpack why this happens, especially for women over 40 who are high performing and health conscious. So before we dive in, I want to give you a roadmap for tonight because I respect your time. And I know many of you are used to high value, high density information. By the end of the session, my hope is that you'll have clarity on why exhaustion isn't a discipline problem. We're going to simplify the science behind stress after 40, what actually shifts hormonally, metabolically, and neurologically, and why your old strategies may not be working the same way anymore. You'll identify your default burnout pattern because most high-performing women have one. And once you can see it, you can interrupt it. And then I'll teach you some practical nervous system tools you can use immediately. Not theory, not fluff, but real tools based in science that change your nervous system state in real time. And finally, I'll walk you through a structured framework for protecting your capacity long term. And it's not pushing through, but performing without burnout. And if something resonates deeply tonight, if you find yourself thinking, this is me, I'll also share a few ways you can continue the work in a more personalized way. But for now, let's get started with understanding what's actually happening in your nervous system. Now, let's start here, okay? Women over 40 are often the CEOs of everyone else's well-being. So many of you can probably shake your head, nod to that, right? So you're managing households, managing careers, managing aging parents, children, even adult children, managing logistics, emotions, expectations. You're the planner, you're the stabilizer, the one who keeps things moving. And many of you are doing that while also lifting heavy and eating clean and trying to stay on top of your game. But the biological truth is that this is also the decade when stress sensitivity increases, not because you're weak, but because physiology shifts. Because around this stage of life, estrogen begins to fluctuate, progesterone might decline, sleep might become lighter, recovery may take longer, and stress buffering just changes. So estrogen supports serotonin and stress regulation. So when it becomes less stable, stress can feel louder. This doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It just means your margin changes. So if you've noticed, I don't bounce back the way I used to, or stress hits harder, or my sleep isn't as deep, my patience is a little thinner, this is not a character flaw. It's physiological transition. And this conversation matters because high-performing women often respond to increased stress sensitivity by pushing harder. More discipline, more structure, more output. But when your physiology shifts, the strategy also needs to shift. So you don't need more grit, you need smarter regulation. So let me be very clear about something. If you are exhausted, if you're wired at night, short-tempered, losing consistency, or you're struggling with cravings, or feeling like your energy isn't stable anymore, this is not a willpower problem, a motivation problem, a discipline problem, or you just need to push harder problem. Most of you in this room are already highly disciplined. That's why I know you are, because of the group that you're a part of. So most of you, you track your macros, you show up to workouts, you manage responsibilities, you hold your standards. So this is not about trying harder. This is a nervous system load problem, because when stress accumulates without enough recovery, when responsibility outweighs support, when your sleep fragments and your hormones fluctuate, your nervous system shifts into protection mode. And protection mode changes everything. Changes energy regulation, your cravings, mood stability, cognitive clarity, how fast you recover. Your body is not lazy, it's overloaded. And so you don't fix overload with more output, you fix it overload with regulation. So if you've been responding to exhaustion by adding more discipline, you may have been solving the wrong problem, I want to say. So tonight we're looking at solving the right one, right? So let's look at the biology. Sorry, my thing. This one. Okay, so there are 3 major players in your stress response, and none of them care about how disciplined you are. They respond to load. And most importantly, they communicate with each other constantly. And this is a network. They're not separate parts, and they're parts of your brain. Starting with the amygdala, which is the threat detector. Many of you have heard of the amygdala. The amygdala scans for danger, and not just physical danger, but emotional pressure, uncertainty, deadlines, conflict, responsibility, social rejection. So you want to think of the amygdala like this smoke alarm. It's a smoke detector that's in your brain. And if it detects threat, whether that's real or perceived, it sends a signal out. But the key is the amygdala doesn't operate in isolation, right? It immediately signals the hypothalamus, which activates the HPA axis, which I'll talk about in a moment. So detection becomes chemistry and emotion becomes hormone. Now, your prefrontal cortex is your executive center of your brain. It's right behind your forehead. It's the area of the brain responsible for your planning, for impulse control, for long-term thinking, consistency. It's a part of the brain that helps you to stick to your macros, to go to the gym when you don't feel like it, to pause before reacting. But under stress, something very predictable happens. When the amygdala is highly activated, remember when that smoke detector is just going off, right? It suppresses prefrontal efficiency. Not because you're broken, but because the brain prioritizes survival over strategy. So in acute danger, that's useful because all of the blood flow is going to your limbic system. But under chronic stress, it's overwhelming and it's exhausting. Now, the HPA axis, if any of you have heard of it, this is, so HPA stands for hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, and it's your body's stress response system. So it's the communication loop that happens between your brain and your adrenal glands. So when the amygdala signals threat, the hypothalamus, which is a small but powerful region in the brain, it releases a chemical called CRH. And CRH is the first messenger in the stress cascade. It tells the next structure in line, which is a pituitary gland, something's happening, mobilize. And then that part, then it activates what we call ACTH. This isn't that important, but if you're interested in what's happening in your brain, this part of the brain its job is to tell the adrenals to release cortisol. And cortisol mobilizes energy. It raises your blood sugar, it increases alertness, and it supports blood pressure. So it's adaptive. It's a performance hormone. You need it. But it's designed for short bursts, not endless activation. So the communication loop looks like this, right? So the amygdala detects threat. It signals the hypothalamus, which activates that HPA axis. Then cortisol rises, and then cortisol feeds back to the brain. Now, in a healthy system, cortisol rises, it does its job, and then it feeds back and shuts the alarm down. It's over. But under chronic stress, it's that alarm keeps firing. It's like that smoke detector just keeps going off. It just keeps ringing. So the rhythm becomes unstable. And then this feedback loop weakens. And when that happens, that's when your sleep gets fragmented, recovery slows, appetite signal shifts, insulin sensitivity can change. Your executive function can decline, right? Planning, judgment, reasoning, even being empathetic, it's going to decline because you're in survival brain, you're emotionally reactive. And this is not theoretical, right? Chronic stress alters your HPA axis regulation and prefrontal functioning. And so the important nuance here is that chronic stress doesn't always mean, it doesn't mean cortisol is always high. When you're under prolonged stress exposure, cortisol rhythms change. So that means it can either be high or it can become completely flattened or irregular. So the issue is really, it's not with high cortisol, it's with dysregulation. So rhythm matters more than those absolute levels. And here's something I just want to share that we discuss in the Stanford Yoga X work that I teach, that stress is not only individual. Your nervous system is shaped by intergenerational stress, by collective stress. So what's happening in this country, the world around you, your community, systemic pressures. So that could be work, that could be politics, that could be the systems that you're a part of, cultural expectations. So your body may not be responding just to today's email, right? But to a pattern of vigilance and over responsibility that were modeled or inherited, you know, that you picked it up other places. And this doesn't mean that you're doomed. It means your stress response has context. So the takeaway here is that, you know, your brain, again, was designed for acute stress, not endless responsibility. But when stress becomes the background noise instead of this short spike, the nervous system adapts. It's because of neuroplasticity. Whatever it's repeatedly doing, it's going to adapt. And eventually that state becomes the baseline. So if you've been feeling wired but tired, disciplined but depleted, motivated but inconsistent, it may not be a mindset issue. It may be a stress physiology issue. And physiology can be regulated. That's a great thing, right? Okay, so I know that was a lot on a little bit of science, so I hope I didn't bore you. I get really excited talking about that stuff, but you know, so we've talked about the neuroscience, the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, the HPA axis, but here's something important, that stress doesn't just live in your brain, it lives in your body. Your nervous system is not abstract, it's embodied. So I want you to notice something right now. Where do you hold stress in your body? If you just maybe take 5 seconds and just scan, where are you holding stress in your body? Is it your jaw, your shoulders, maybe your gut or your chest? Don't analyze, just notice. And maybe you can drop one word in the chat where you feel it. So different bodies, different patterns, right? Same stress system. And here's why this matters. The ability to notice internal sensations is called interoceptive awareness. Interoception, we call it also. So that the research shows that people with stronger interoceptive awareness, meaning you know how you feel, where you're holding stress, what you're experiencing on a somatic level, people who have a strong awareness of that tend to have better emotional regulation and stress recovery. So, because you can't regulate what you cannot feel. If stress is invisible to you, it becomes your baseline. But the moment you notice tension, and you've already begun to shift it. And this is so powerful for high functioning women because many of you are excellent at overriding your body. You can push through, you can ignore fatigue, you can ignore tension, you can ignore signals, but your body keeps score. And it keeps signaling jaw tension, shoulder tightness, gut constriction. These are not personality flaws. They're nervous system cues. So from this point forward tonight, I want you to treat your body like data, not something to judge, just data. Because awareness is the first layer of regulation. So we just talked about how stress lives in the body. Now let's talk about why for many women over 40, that stress can feel amplified. Like this is where physiology matters. Now around your late 30s and 40s, the body begins transitioning into perimenopause. And this is important because the perimenopause is not a disease, right? It's a neurological and hormonal recalibration. But it does change your stress landscape. So what's actually happening here? Estrogen begins to fluctuate, not just decline, fluctuate. And estrogen plays several important roles in the brain. right? It supports serotonin regulation. It interacts with the stress response system, that HPA axis. It influences sleep quality, and it supports cognitive clarity. So when estrogen is more stable, serotonin signaling tends to be more supported. And when estrogen, is less stable, stress buffering can feel less automatic. So estrogen doesn't just affect reproduction, it interacts with serotonin. Now, serotonin, it plays a role in mood regulation, emotional stability, sleep regulation, stress buffering, and impulse control. So when estrogen fluctuates, some women experience increased irritability, mood variability, disruptions in their sleep, and heightened stress sensitivity. Not because they are losing control, but because neurochemistry is shifting. So changes in estrogen don't mean you're destined to feel anxious or depressed. I just want to note that, but they can make your emotional baseline more sensitive. And this doesn't mean you can't handle stress. It just means the margin narrows. So this is where many women might notice, again, changes in their sleep. They may wake up more at night. Recovery from intense workouts might take longer. Mood can feel less predictable. They might have less patience, not because they've lost resilience, but because the neuroendocrine environment is shifting. So if you've always relied on pushing through, this is the decade where pushing harder may backfire. That strategy maybe worked when at 32, but may not work at 42. Not because you're weaker, not because you're old, but because the physiology has changed. And this doesn't mean you're broken. This doesn't mean you're fragile. It doesn't mean you need to fear your hormones. It means your stress margin changes. And when the margin changes, again, the strategy just has to change. Right? So perimenopause is not the loss of strength. It's the loss of stress buffering capacity. And that buffering can be supported. Now, so we've talked about physiology, we've talked about hormones, but there's another layer that doesn't get discussed enough. So something I talk about often in my clinical and my executive work is something I call the high functioning trap. Because high performing women don't usually burn out because they're incapable. They burn out because they're over capable. So a lot of these women, including maybe yourself, your high performing women, they overfunction. They're anticipating everyone else's needs before being asked. They suppress their anger to keep the peace. They carry a mental load no one sees. They struggle to even receive support, and they feel anxious when they're not being productive. And because it looks like competence, it actually gets rewarded, right? So, but here's the problem, is that when you chronically override your own needs, when you suppress frustration, when you absorb responsibility that isn't fully yours, your body doesn't interpret that as strength. It interprets it as sustained stress. So, emotional suppression, if you're suppressing your emotions, it's not neutral, right? So the research in emotional regulation shows that suppressing your emotions actually increases sympathetic activation, right? That fight or flight state. So your heart rate rises, blood pressure increases, cortisol can elevate, cognitive load increases. So you may look calm externally, but internally your system is working harder. And over time, that cost accumulates. So if you've spent decades being the reliable one, the strong one, the emotionally contained one, your nervous system may be carrying stress that never had space to discharge. And that's not weakness, that's unprocessed load. So high functioning, right, is not the same as regulated. And productivity is not the same as safety. So I want you to consider something gently here. What if your burnout isn't a capacity problem, but a boundary problem? What if the exhaustion isn't because you're not strong enough, but because you've been strong for too long without recovery? And what if you don't need more grit, but more regulation? Like, what if you're not underperforming, you're over functioning? So those are questions I want you to consider and reflect on with yourself. So if you're resonating with this idea of overfunctioning, let's make it specific, because burnout doesn't look the same on everyone. So in my work with high performing women, I tend to see three dominant patterns, and none of these are diagnoses. They're adaptive strategies, and every one of them made sense. So I want you to notice which one feels the most familiar for you. Like, don't overthink it, just go with your gut. Now, the over-responsible achiever is the person who says, if I don't do it, it won't get done. Right? So they're highly capable, highly competent, often the leader. So you take initiative before anyone even asks, and you hold high standards for yourself and for everyone else. So your stress shows up as jaw tension, as shallow breathing, as mental overdrive. You struggle to delegate, not because you can't, but because it feels easier to just handle it, right? That's the over-responsible achiever. Now, the emotional caretaker is the person you track everyone's emotional state. You're the one who smooths conflict, you're anticipating reactions, you're absorbing like the tension, maybe of your family or of your workplace, your environments that you're in. You might even suppress anger to keep the peace. And so your stress might show up as tightness in your chest, fatigue, feeling emotionally depleted. You give generously, but receiving support feels uncomfortable. And then third is the high functioning numb person. So this one, you get things done, you perform, you execute, you stay productive, but underneath, joy feels muted, rest feels uncomfortable, silence feels unsettling. So you may not feel stressed, you just feel flat or restless or wired without depth. So if you'd like, in the chat, I want you to type 1, 2, or 3, like just a number that feels most like you.
1.
See these. How do I do this? Yeah, okay. So look at that. So 1 and 3, 1 and 3, multiple 1, all but mostly 2. Yep. Yeah. So different patterns, same stress systems, right? So if you typed 1, your strength, that you have, your strength is competence, but your nervous system may rarely power down. If you typed 2, your strength is empathy, but your nervous system might be carrying emotions that aren't yours. If you type 3, your strength is performance, but your nervous system may be avoiding stillness. Now, none of these are flaws. They're adaptations, right? Because the body's always working in service of survival. And tonight we're learning how to regulate them. So thank you for sharing where you're at. So I want to be clear, right? Like, I lift heavy. Many of you lift heavy, and strength training is powerful because we know that heavy lifting improves insulin sensitivity. It supports bone density, protects muscle mass, increases confidence, and enhances that stress resilience and nervous system flexibility, meaning you can activate under pressure and then return to baseline more efficiently. So resistance training is not the problem. In many cases, it's protective. But the nuance is that your nervous system doesn't categorize stress. It just calculates total load. Okay, so the equation isn't, heavy lifting is bad. No, the equation is high intensity with high life stress and poor sleep and hormonal fluctuation equals recovery debt. So when overall stress load is high, cortisol recovery, remember how it shoots up when you're activated, the recovery can be slower. Muscle protein synthesis may be less efficient. Deep sleep may decrease, and your appetite regulation that can shift. Even your perceived effort, it's like it feels like you're trying harder. That increases. It's like if you feel like you're trying so hard and nothing's happening. And it's not that the workout is harmful, it's that the system may not be fully resourced. So what we're looking at, what I want you to consider is that, what would happen if your body needed regulation and not more output? More recovery. Like, does that feel relieving or threatening? Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is match intensity to capacity. So it's always looking at like, how much capacity do I have? Because we're doing so much and we don't realize the impact of all of the things happening in our life and how that's affecting our hormones and our capacity, right? Our nervous system's capacity. So how do we do this? How do we regulate our nervous system? So I want to show you a few tools. And these are the exact regulation tools I use with executive leaders, high-performing founders, and even elite athletes. Because the body doesn't care whether your stress comes from a boardroom, a family, or a workout. The nervous system only cares about load. So when you're under stress, the amygdala, right, signals threat, the sympathetic nervous system activates, your heart rate increases, your breathing shortens, cortisol and adrenaline rise, right? So if that state doesn't resolve, it becomes your baseline. And the fastest way to interrupt that loop is your breath.
You're gonna hit the thing.
Yes, it's a thing. So your breath, there's a reason we're always teaching breath work, right? Specifically longer exhale. So, if you want to, what you would do here, we'll practice in a second, but because the research in respiratory physiology, it shows that extending the exhale phase stimulates the vagus nerve, and that increases the parasympathetic activation, meaning that rest and digest state. And so it slows your heart rate variability patterns towards that regulation state. So in simple terms, longer exhales tells your brain, we are not under immediate threat. And the brain listens. So a 90-second reset protocol, right? This is not meditation, it's regulation. So here, what you do is you put your feet flat on the floor like we did earlier. And this just helps us to feel more grounded and supported. You drop your shoulders. What's that? You drop your shoulders a bit, maybe just like 10%. And inhale through the nose for 4. So you count it for 4. And then you exhale slowly for 6 to 8. So when you're breathing in that pattern, right, in a deep inhale through the nose and a longer exhale than the inhale, we're biasing the parasympathetic system. We're signaling safety. So you want to do that for at least 4 to 5 rounds, and the breath is always with you, right? This is something that's always accessible. You could be driving, you could be standing in line at the grocery store, you could be at the airport. You always have access to your breath. So now that you're starting to understand interoceptive awareness, like notice, like I'm feeling a little tense right now. You can start with doing this type of breath work, right? Because we know that even the research shows that the autonomic shifts can occur within 1 to 2 minutes when your respiratory patterns change. And this is long enough to interrupt that sympathetic dominance, that fight or flight state dominance. So it's short enough to use between meetings, before a workout, or when you're about to snap at someone you love. You always have access to this. This is something you can do all the time. So you want to do this, again, before difficult conversations. You can even do this before bed if you're having a hard time falling asleep. This helps to regulate before bedtime, because anxiety does tend to increase in the evening when you're less distracted. So just again, you don't need to eliminate stress. You need to become skilled at downshifting, right? Just like athletes periodize training, like how high capacity women must periodize their nervous systems, their cycles for this. And so if you practice nothing else from tonight, I want you to practice this, not when you feel calm, but when you feel activated. Because resilience, true resilience, it's not avoiding stress. That's kind of impossible. It's learning how to recover from it quickly. Okay, so the first tool, right, we're talking about, it's regulating in acute stress. And the second tool is about preventing that overload. So high performers don't burn out from one big stressor. They burn out from unbroken activation. So stress becomes dangerous when it's continuous. The nervous system was designed for cycles, right? There's activation and then recovery, and then activation and then recovery. But most women over 40 that I work with, they're activating, 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 right? And never completing the cycle. So micro recovery windows, they restore the cycle. So when stress accumulates without recovery, remember your cortisol remains elevated, your heart rate variability just decreases, your sleep will worsen, your executive function declines. And so research in stress physiology and occupational health show that these brief, frequent recovery periods during the day, they reduce that physiological stress load and even improve your performance. So recovery doesn't require a vacation, right? It just requires some oscillation. So this is, you can try this 60-second micro recovery even right now. So if you're seated, you would uncross your legs, you strengthen your spine slightly. You can roll your shoulders back once. So we just need to interrupt, right? So I want you to take a second and just look away from your screen. Try to find the farthest object in your room. And soften your gaze. Let your eyes widen slightly. So this signals to the brain, we are not under immediate threat. So when we're under stress, our vision becomes narrowed. So when you're expanding your vision, as you are right now, looking away from the screen and just kind of doing some grounding like this, it helps to create a signal of safety to the nervous system. The second thing you can do is just drop your shoulders and release your jaw. So drop your shoulders 10% more than you think. And unclench your jaw. This is just micro muscle relaxation, and it sends feedback to the brainstem that the threat has reduced.
Hi,
The
Krista
third
Hilton.
The third thing is just a posture shift reset.
31852.
So this is where you just kind of reshift your posture. So you would, again, just put both feet flat on the floor. You lengthen your spine and lean back slightly instead of forward. Because when we're leaning forward, it actually increases activation.
You should have been ready a long time ago.
Sorry. Do you all mind putting your mic on mute? Sorry, there's some background noise. Thank you. So this is where you would, again, you lengthen your spine. You're doing a very quick posture shift. You uncross your legs, place both feet on the floor, lengthen your spine, and you lean back slightly instead of forward. Because when you're leaning forward, it increases activation. It's like we're ready to fight, we're ready to run. But when you're leaning back and your back is supported, It's a safety cue. Like I'm okay, right? So these micro shifts, it sends again signals to our brain that we are safe. And then finally, just doing a 20-second exhale bias, right? So you can do this for 20 seconds. You don't even have to count, but you're extending your exhale, a few seconds longer than your inhale, right? Let's see where we are. Okay, so this third tool is where physiology meets psychology. So the nervous system doesn't just respond to physical stress, it responds to responsibility, to invisible labor, to emotional management, to being the strong one. So most burnout in high functioning women isn't from weakness, it's from over functioning. So there's strong research showing that when you're constantly responsible for everything, especially the things no one sees, your stress levels rise and burnout risk increases. So your body doesn't distinguish well between physical danger and emotional overload. A looming deadline, a difficult relationships, a child's distress, a tense email, or a true survival threat. If it feels heavy or unresolved, your stress response activates the same way. And if you're the one that's carrying things that aren't yours to carry, that activation never completes. So this is where you can take even just 90 seconds here, right? Just kind of taking a look at your load. I want you to write privately, and no one needs to see this, but I want you to ask yourself, what am I carrying that's not actually mine? Where am I over functioning in a way that no one has explicitly asked me to? What am I doing primarily from guilt? So just a few questions asking yourself, and then you pause and let silence do the work, because your body will talk to you. Your nervous system will speak to you. And then you can just notice what came up, right? Like, did your jaw tighten? Did something obvious surface immediately? Did your chest feel heavy? This is data, because your body already knows where the excess load is. And even with this, that there is research on cognitive load and emotional labor. It shows like that chronic role strain, like never being fully off duty or always being the one in charge, and invisible labor, right? So the behind the scenes work that never gets acknowledged, that significantly increases stress biomarkers and increases burnout risk. So if you feel like everything rests on you, your nervous system feels that too. And the more responsibility you carry without real control, the more reactive your nervous system becomes. So this isn't about lowering your standards, it's about correcting your scope, right? So when I'm working with executive clients, we don't start with productivity hacks. We start with load clarity, because clarity reduces cortisol, but uncertainty increases it. And you can't regulate a nervous system while carrying unnecessary weight, right? So like you train with progressive overload, but what if you never deload, right? What happens? You get injured, right? You're more prone to injury if you never take that time. And the same is true psychologically. Deloading responsibility, it's not weakness, it's strategy. So you don't need to become less capable. You need to become less over responsible, because strength without boundaries becomes depletion, but strength with boundaries becomes longevity. Now, if you want a steady nervous system, you have to protect your sleep. And I know this is like it's a number one complaint that what patients come to in the clinical settings is their sleep. Now, after 40, recovery becomes less forgiving, right? Those hormonal shifts during perimenopause, that increases that sleep fragmentation, those night awakenings, stress sensitivity. So we don't need perfection, we need protection. Now, cortisol, it follows a rhythm. Like it should rise in the morning and then peak shortly after you wake up, and then gradually decline throughout the day, and then be low at night. But when that rhythm is disrupted, right, that's when your sleep becomes lighter, recovery slows down, your mood is, you're just more reactive, and even fat storage patterns can shift. So circadian rhythms regulate not just sleep, but metabolism, hormone signaling, and cognitive function. So you can't out-train circadian disruption. And this study at the bottom, I put some resources there. If you want the full resources, references, I can send those to you. But this study by Ruger and Shear was done in 2020. They looked at what happens to the body when our internal clock gets thrown off. So your body, it runs on a 24-hour rhythm called the circadian rhythm. And it controls things like when you feel awake, when you feel sleepy, how your hormones rise and fall, how your body uses energy. And these researchers found that when this rhythm gets disrupted, like from late nights, shift work, irregular sleep, or not getting enough light in the morning, it can affect your metabolism. So that means your body may not use sugar as efficiently. Hormones that control your hunger and fullness can shift. Cortisol timing can get off, and the risk for weight gain and metabolic problems can actually increase. So when your sleep and light patterns are inconsistent, your body's timing system gets confused, and that confusion affects energy, hormones, and metabolism. But we can protect this rhythm, starting with morning light within 30 minutes of waking, right? So natural light, it anchors your brain's clock, your brain's internal clock. It strengthens that cortisol awakening response, right? Even 5 to 10 minutes outdoors help. It helps to anchor that circadian timing and support your metabolic regulation. It doesn't just magically lower cortisol, I just want to be clear, but it stabilizes the rhythm. Now, does this morning light have to be outdoors? No, but outdoors is significantly more effective because indoor light, indoor light is better than none, but light intensity is measured in what they call lux. And so typically indoor lighting is at like 100 to 500, but a sunny morning is like 50,000. So you want to, so even being outdoors, even on a cloudy day, it's going to be better than not going out at all. But even indoor lighting is helpful if that's all you have access to. Caffeine timing, so caffeine has a half-life of 5 to 7 hours. So, you want to kind of obviously delay. So when you delay, when late caffeine, when you're having caffeine late, it delays sleep onset. It's going to reduce that deep sleep. So just think about your sleep, is that interrupting your sleep? So it's not about eliminating coffee, but protecting the back half of your day. Same thing with intensive workouts at night, right? Too close to bedtime, it can delay sleep. It doesn't mean you don't train at night, but just think about the intensity at that time of the day. And then finally, magnesium rich foods, because magnesium, it plays a role in muscle relaxation and also nervous system regulation. So this isn't about like rigid biohacking. It's about, this training strategically and fueling strategically. Now, just real quickly, I just want to share why willpower, like talking about willpower, because a lot of high performing women that if I was just a little bit more disciplined, if I tried harder, if I had more self-control, then it would be better. But willpower is not a personality state or a trait, right? It's a neurological state. And neurological state is shaped by safety. And so behavior change actually sticks when the nervous system feels safe. When your body perceives stress, even if it's not life-threatening, your brain is shifting to protection mode. And so protection mode is going to prioritize, conserving energy, scanning for threat, not long-term goals, not strategic thinking. So if you constantly feel behind or rushed or over-responsible or on edge, your brain interprets that as threat. And when the brain detects threat, the prefrontal cortex is part responsible for discipline and planning and impulse control. It becomes less efficient. And this isn't weakness, it's just biology. So you don't need more motivation, you need more safety, right? So you can't shame a nervous system into long-term change. It's just like noticing this is data, this is where I'm at, and so if discipline hasn't been working, maybe it's not a discipline problem, maybe it's a safety problem, right? So before we close, I just want to say this gently, if parts of tonight felt uncomfortably familiar, if you saw yourself in the over-functioning or the wired and exhausted, the I look fine, but I'm not feeling great, please don't walk away and just try harder tomorrow, because insight without support fades. So I've created a few structured ways for you, not as pressure, but as care. So first is the Cortisol-Protective morning routine guide. I just created this. It should be available on my website right now. If it's not, just give it a day. My web developer is a little slow because I created it specifically for you all. And so I had to rush and try to get that on there. But if that's not available yet, it will be very soon. But the mental fitness workbook is available. That's another thing that's just available on my website. That's free, for you to download if you want to learn more, kind of go deeper in some of these tips. And then third, I'm opening a limited number of 20-minute case consults. So if you're thinking, I don't want just information, I want clarity, we can look at your specific stress load, your patterns, and your next step. Not to sell you something, but to help you stop carrying this alone. Because here's what I know, right, is that strong women don't burn out because they're weak. They burn out because they've been strong for too long without support. And every one of you deserves support. So if tonight resonated, take what serves you. The other thing, I just want to thank you all for showing up, not just physically, but honestly, just being yourself and also, sharing in the chat, because these conversations, they're not just surface level, they require courage. And I want to acknowledge Fit Foodie Chicks for creating this community where strength isn't just aesthetic, it's intentional, where women over 40 are not dismissed, they're prioritized. And that matters. So if tonight resonated, I hope, you leave with this, that you're not too much, you're not behind, you're not failing at discipline. You are a strong woman living in a body that deserves rhythm, and that rhythm can be rebuilt. Regulation can be trained and capacity can be expanded. So again, you don't need to shrink. You don't need to do this on your own, that there is support available. So thank you to Fit Foodie Chicks for collaborating on this. And thank you all truly for trusting me with your nervous system tonight. Power that never pauses becomes survival, but power that knows how to recover becomes longevity. So I want us to just continue to build longevity together. So thank you all. I know that we're at our time, but any quick questions, or you can feel free to email me questions if you don't have time to stay on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Minnie. This was amazing.
Of course.
Yeah, I knew it would be. So thank you.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you all. Have a great night, and we'll hopefully see you all later.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.